I'll call the meeting to order. Finance Committee for Tuesday, November 4th, 2014 is now called to order at 7:04 p.m. Please take the roll.
Okay. Juliet Boyd.
Here.
Rich Regan.
Here.
Randy Brockway. Rachel Morella. Michael O'Brien.
Here.
And Mary Rose Mandia. Here. Looks like
No public comments today. Okay. Then we'll go to moving off public comment. Please note that Rachel Morello is here. Big agenda tonight. Lots to get through. I'm determined to keep this meeting on time, so please be specific and brief with your comments. And the first item we have is for discussion is the levy. We have a decision in December about the upcoming levy, and so we asked David Sellers to give us an overview and recommendation. All yours, David.
Okay. I have extra copies of the materials that were distributed in case any board member needs an extra copy. I'll put these off to the side, not seeing any takers. I'm told I should be at this microphone, so I'll move it a little bit over here. And that's all right. The first agenda item is tax levy recommendation and dashboard. So I'd like to take this packet of information and go through it pretty much page by page, but I'm going to assume that we don't need to spend a lot of time on each page. There's two pages in particular that I think we can spend a lot of time on compared to the others. So the first page is giving you kind of an executive overview of the levy recommendation, showing you the tax cap formula, how the numerator and the denominator are calculated, and the tax levy recommendation for 2014 tax year is $23,543,760, which represents a 2.2% increase over the 2013 extension of $23,037,000. The 2.2% increase is somewhat unusually low by historic standards because the tax cap national CPI effective for the 2014 levy is 1.5%. So it's 0.7% above the national CPI, which is the most important factor built into the tax cap formula. On page 2, a bit of a retrospective on where there's a table saying percentage increase over the prior year. If you look at 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, the levy amount for 11 and 12 is 4.9% anticipated increase. Hello, David. Good evening.
Hello. Excuse me.
It's important to underscore that a tax levy is a request. It has unknown factors at the time the board adopts a tax levy. Therefore, it really is, you can almost scratch the word levy and replace it with the word request. Whether the request is granted is determined by the tax extension office of the given county, in this case Cook County, and they apply the tax cap formula and decide to what extent your request is going to be granted. So on page 2, under the row titled Tax Levy, 4.9, 4.90, and 2.2, that puts in perspective the 2.2 as compared with the prior 3 years. And in 2011, the 4.9 translated into an actual increase billed to taxpayers of 1.8%. In 2012, there was a 3% tax cap CPI, a little on the higher side by historical standards. and the final actual extension was 3.1%. 2013, there was a 1.2% reduction, and that was mainly because of the reaching of ceilings or maximums in the educational and special education tax rates. And then the 2.2%, as I mentioned, is 0.7% above the CPI, and that is presented as a recommendation because of anticipated new property. And I'll be getting to that. It's important that the board, when you are making this request, which is your levy, it's important that you anticipate the best case scenario of new property, because one of the ways in which the tax system works, what you request is its own inherent cap. You cannot exceed, or the extension cannot exceed what you ask for. Even if by some surprising circumstances the new property dollar amount in the formula is far greater than what was anticipated at the time of the adoption of the levy. So as I'm mentioning on page 2, we're looking at a $3 million assumption for new property. I'd say $2 million, maybe $2.2 million of that is rock solid, based upon information from the assessor's office, the Costco, Chick-fil-A. You know, there's some developments that are very tangibly recognized at this point, but there's not an assessor in the state of Illinois that can tell you what the new property is going to be. So $3 million is the most wildly optimistic number that I think is still relevant to our discussion. So $3 million is the recommended optimistic best case scenario for new property. So I'd like to skip over page 3, which is just a table of contents. Page 4 really is what I like to call the dashboard. The dashboard is, and I don't know whether I've over, or maybe I've assumed the benefit of this maybe to too great an amount, but I've been told in the past that if you can get everything on one page, one side of one piece of paper, there's a benefit to that. So this is jam-packed with information on this one side of one piece of paper. So I'm going to walk through some of the portions of this document. In the upper left-hand corner, the board is being presented with the EAV history, tax year 2006 to 2013, with a percent change of your EAV history, the new property that was incorporated into that additional growth of the tax year, and then the national CPI that was in effect under the tax cap legislation known as the Property Tax Extension Limitation Law in that column. And I'm using the, I'm underscoring the fact that we have 2 unknowns and 1 known. The EAV for 2014 is unknown. The recommendation incorporates 7% reduction as the proposed estimate of EAV for 2014, and then $3 million, as I mentioned before, as is currently unknown. The only known of the 3 factors is the national CPI, and it says CD below, CE below, and CB below because below is the tax cap formula. The tax cap formula is as follows. The prior year extension is multiplied times the growth factor equaling the national CPI to get the numerator in the formula. The denominator of the formula is the EAV minus the new property, and then dividing the numerator by the denominator, you come up with the limiting rate. So this formula applied to our current situation with those factors built into it calculates to $23,543,760, a 2.2% increase. In column B of the tax cap formula, that 1.5% factor is definitely the most driving factor within the tax cap formula. So you take the 23,543,760 and then spread it, as is shown above, fund by fund. That's in column E, with the column title being Proposed 2014 Levy, starting with 15,393 in the educational fund and so forth down that column. And that's basically how it works. In the upper right-hand corner, I'm indicating that new property is there at $3 million, but the largest new property in the past 8 years is $4.673 million. And I did talk to the assessor about the degree to which that was foreseeable at the time when that larger of an amount came onto the tax rolls, and the answer was partially yes, partially no. They certainly did know that there was a lot of building permits being closed, which is new property exists because of the recording of closed building permits, and that was related to the North Riverside Mall. So this is in the middle, I'm saying that there is a difference between the triennial year, the 1 year, and the 2 year. I used to take those factors a lot more. I used to consider them more important than I do today, because since 2008 we've had a historically unusual drop in property values. Basically the crash of housing that started and you can see your EAV peaked in 2008. I'm in the upper left-hand corner. Your EAV peaked at $690 million, and we would be projecting at a 7% reduction, $439.8 million, that's really almost a free fall as far as your EAV is concerned. Every time business managers get together with county officials, the tax extension officer who handles this, Bill Vaslopoulos, one of the first questions is, where do you see EAV going? Do you see this bottoming out? And the answer is yes. It's been yes for a couple of years. Unfortunately, last year you still did experience a 6.8 reduction in your EAV. But we're hopefully, and I know hope is not a good business plan, but we have to, I think, look forward to a better future as far as home and commercial property values within your attendance boundaries. But at the same time that I'm saying that, in developing this formula, I do have a 7% reduction as an assumption. That's a margin of safety. Again, when you calculate your request is something that you expect to not be met. Your levy is always greater than the extension. So just moving on to page 5, and I'm going to try and go through this stuff pretty quickly, and then we can come back to every one of these pages if you'd like to look at them again. They're paginated so we can easily jump to the page that you're interested in looking at. So page 5 is kind of what I just showed to you in table format in the upper left-hand corner of the dashboard, showing the EAV. It also shows you the tax rate, and the tax rate increased substantially from tax year 06 to 07 because of the passage of a referendum, and we're phasing in that additional taxing power that the referendum afforded the school district. The bottom chart is taxes extended on property tax revenues. So, here's you approve a tax levy, which is your request. The tax extension office sends out the bills, which is what we expect everybody to pay, and a couple of percentage points get cut off because people don't pay on time. So, or they don't pay at all. There's certain things that happen. Your collection rate is not going to be 100%. And another thing that I need to let the board know, and I have some materials that went out to you, we did some more research regarding your property tax refunds, and we'll take a look at that. But the reason why your average has only been an increase of 1.26% per year is because of tax refunds. You've had some pretty serious activity as far as settlement of property tax appeals board cases or circuit court cases where taxpayers are saying, you're taxing me too high, lower my bill, and a judge or the PTAB says we agree. And when that happens, then the taxes get reduced. So the difference between what you levy will be reduced at the extension step and then reduced again based upon property tax appeals and objection settlements. So looking at page 6, I like to do this. It just makes me feel a sense of familiarity with the school district tax bills. I get I can get this information from the county. It's called an 85G report, and they give me every PIN number and the tax bill and the name and the address and the whole 9 yards. So for 1 year, one tax year for this school district, it's 117 pages. I looked at it, and then I feed it into a Visual Basic program, and I get some statistics out of that raw data. And it's interesting to look at that information. And going back over the last 3 years, we can see that you're basically at 74% residential, 25%, a little over 25% commercial, and looking at the property tax bills that are sent to people with a 60546 zip code, there are, in tax year 2013, 3,408 of them. Those are your pure residents. If it's sent to a zip code that's outside of 60546, it's probably a person who owns, they own an apartment building, something like that. Somebody who's not a resident, along with being the owner. So that's kind of a backdrop for your information. I think it's important to know and track from year to year the contribution to this school district by commercial industrial taxpayers.
Is the part of our district that's in Brookfield represented here? Because they wouldn't have a 60546 zip code, would they?
That would be news to me. I was told that every attendance boundary within the school district was 60546. But let me think. My 85G report, well, actually, no, it would be those Brookfield, anybody without a 60546 would be represented in the out of district, where it says 60-.
Okay, so that's...
They would be counted within that. Because the 85G report is for this taxing district. For the district.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, the way it's being broken out is the mailing address, zip code.
Mm-hmm.
On page 7 is something for your review, which is what would be translated into a income taxation notice in the paper. On page 8, I'd like to, this is something that I greatly enjoy doing every year. I don't know how much time we need to spend on this evening, but it's a good idea, I think, for the board to get a sense of where this school district compares in key and important financial indicators. So I'm going to run through this pretty quickly. First of all, in order to get down to a fairly manageable number of school districts, and I really can't do this for hundreds of school districts. This is all done by hand, using Excel and cutting and pasting out of annual financial reports. It's a pretty labor-intensive process to render all the backup for this. So what I did was take all of the school districts in suburban Cook and Collier counties that have enrollments between 1,100 and 1,900 that are elementary districts. So the theory of that is you're dealing with school districts that have the same kind of economies of scale. And so similar economies of scale and regionally relevant Cook and Cook and Collier County school districts. 1,100 and 1,900 And taking those 48, which is a fairly decent number of school districts for comparison purposes, your EAV per pupil is in the 56th percentile. All of the gray bars and the numbers within the gray bars represent your percentile rank. So 56% have lesser EAV per pupil. EAV per pupil is the measure of your local wealth. You know, how rich are you as a district? You know, that terminology. A rich district. A rich district has a lot of EAV per pupil. 44% have more in terms of that statistic, out of the 48 that we compared ourselves to. We're in the 83rd percentile in terms of our tax rate. That says that that column is loosely termed your local effort. Your effort is how much the local taxpayers have agreed to be taxed, at what rate. And this school district, I'm sure, took a significant step upwards in this measure when you passed a referendum, because passing a referendum is the local taxpayers giving you authority to go to a higher tax rate. So we're fairly well up there, but 17% are still higher. So what is an 83, like a B plus or B minus?
C minus.
Either way, I know that it lends itself to a grading system, but 83rd percentile I think is a significant factor. The next one combines those two factors and looks at for all the funds where you can collect taxes, what are your property taxes per pupil? We're in the 77th percentile, and I put that as your fiscal strength. So combining those first two bars, you come up with the third bar, which is your fiscal strength. But I like to say to people that if we wanted to compare ourselves to all of these 48 districts, in anything that we're doing, we should be as good or stronger than 77%, but we might end up being weaker than 23%, because that's where we're positioned as far as our local ability to afford things, you know, as compared with other school districts. So that's really your measure of affordability and your fiscal strength. Your educational fund cumulative cash reserves as a percentage of expenditures, you're up to in the 94th percentile. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. Everyone, I think, has recognized that the school district has very strong cash reserves. That's a little bit, it's a little bit difficult to process that factor, though. And I probably need to study it a little bit further, in the sense that your educational fund balance of 28-point-something million includes money that is already spoken for to pay a $10 million bond issue, which the balance currently is about $8 million. So your cash reserves as a percent of expenditures is different. Almost all school districts don't run this through the educational fund because they have a debt service extension base, and I can get into that, but this school district is only among 3 school districts that don't have a debt service extension base. So your long-term debt is being serviced and managed out of your educational fund, which I think causes perhaps a misinterpretation of the degree to which you have a huge cash reserve, because your 28 million, you really should just chop that down to about 20 million right off the bat, because 8 million of that 28 is reserved. If Standard & Poor's or Moody's were to assess the financial condition of this district, they would immediately do that and say, you know, what's your unreserved cash balance? Okay, so anyway, that's a little bit of a hard factor for the comparison process that I've gone through. Per capita tuition, on the other hand, is pretty straightforward. It's this is what the auditors, every school district has to have an independent auditor. The independent auditor calculates your per capita tuition. There's a page in your audit report that does that calculation. We're in the 56th percentile. Loosely, that's called your cost per pupil. What a per capita tuition charge means is that if somebody wanted to come here and they did not live within our attendance boundaries, that's what you would charge that person to attend one of your schools. And they factor out some things that are flow-through that relate to special education. So in order to come up with a fair number that would be, you know, the proper charge amount to someone who's an out-of-district placement within your school, they do some changes, and it's mainly just taking federal and state certain types of grant money and special education money and setting it to the side when they do the calculation. O&M cost per pupil is just you know, how much your expenditures are in the operations and maintenance fund. I like to look at that because, you know, your buildings and grounds function is an important part of the school system. You're in the 40th percentile, 85th percentile. It's a very healthy number as far as what percent of your expenditures in the educational fund are within functions that are classified as for direct instruction. At one time in Springfield, they talked about mandating that school districts have at least 51% of their total expenditures to be trackable to direct instruction. So either way, we're showing a pretty good rank as far as that's concerned. Your percent spent for salaries and benefits in the educational fund. For the comparison purposes, I did take out your debt service when I did that calculation, because again, you're an anomaly. And I did call the other two school districts that don't have a debt service extension base and talk with them about their situation. So we are very unusual. Most school districts, if you look at their annual financial report, you will see revenue from property taxes in the debt service fund. But you don't have that because in 1992, when the tax cap was put in place, it was voted and signed into law, you weren't servicing any debt. And the law said you can continue to service whatever debt you were servicing in 1992. Well, some school districts didn't have any debt on the books. Kind of a few number, not you know, most school districts did have debt on the books, but this school district is among those that did not have any debt on the books. Therefore, if you wanted to have a debt service extension base, you'd have to go out for a referendum, get the voters to approve having a debt service extension base. Then lastly, your bonded debt per pupil, 42nd percentile. That includes your long-term debt you have on your recent capital improvement program. So this kind of thing just, you know, makes me enjoy my job, because I like to look at this kind of stuff. It gives me a real strong idea of how this school district fits in a grander scheme of things. I guess if I, you know, had more time and wanted to create something that would be sustainable over time, maybe I might increase this to comparing us with, you know, 150 school districts, but I don't know if I want to punish myself that much, because this really is quite a time-consuming endeavor.
David, for the districts that had debt service had debt in 92,
Yeah.
are they allowed to take on new debt as well, or do they just
By
have
a referendum.
Oh, so in other words, once they pay off this existing debt that they had in 1992, they would have to take...
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question. The definition of a debt service extension base, for example, I've worked at three different school districts, high school districts. The debt service extension base for Lyons Township was about $2.1 million. Joliet Township is about, I think it's about $2.8 million, and District 201, Morton is $9.7 million per year. That's like a car payment.
Okay.
In other words, they can go into debt and service that debt with that being their annual payment on their debt. So the most that school districts really ever go out is 20 years, and you know, that's a very, very rare exception. 8 to 10 years is fairly normal to go out to debt. So for a school district with a $2 million debt service extension base, you know, having $16 million capital improvement projects would be something they would do about every 8 to 10 years, and they would just repeat that. And all the while, every single year, on a perfectly consistent basis, their debt service tax levy would be identical from year to year.
Okay.
Because they're only paying on their long-term debt to that extent. So like a car payment, you can take out a car payment for, you know, for 5 years or 7 years nowadays, and you know that's how you schedule your own personal budget.
Okay. But if they pay it off, right? They pay off the car.
Right.
And do they lose their ability to levy, I guess?
No, they do not.
So they can always have that, and they
Right.
can, all right.
The only downside, you know, from a business manager's perspective, as I, you know, would advise a board of education, I would say that's a practice you probably want to avoid, because most school districts have significant capital needs. And once it drops off, then when it goes back on, a taxpayer opening their tax bill is going to go, wow, I got a bigger tax bill. And then they're going to want an explanation. So you create controversy and people noticing that their tax bill has taken a jump. People always notice when their tax bill goes up, and they tend to forget relatively quickly when their tax bill goes down. That's
Okay.
being a little facetious there, but when your tax bill goes up, you notice.
Okay.
So page 9 is you know, this is something that I hope you know, a reference document. You know, how do you calculate taxes? And you know, here's an example. This is an example that relates to the current equalization factor that's defined by the state, etc. And that is kind of coupled with page 10, which is, you know, how do you answer questions from taxpayers. And these are kind of fluid documents from my perspective. Anytime a board member wants to email me your feelings about these pages, I'd be glad to make editorial changes. It's just a matter of, you know, how do we relate to the public? It's almost a PR piece. And I'm not a PR specialist, I'm a business official. So anytime anybody wants to punch those up, you're more than welcome. Page 11 is a very important presentation. We could spend quite a bit of time on this one. So I'll try and keep it as concise as possible. It's pretty complicated, but the gist of this is to render the argument that the tax cap is a powerful protection for the homeowner that is an ongoing resident. And that's not something that I can just say, it's something that I can prove, because numbers are there. These are actual results from our past tax extensions. So let's take 2012 for example. 2013 is a little bit different, but let's take 2012. Your tax rate is 4.594. Your equalized assessed valuation 507,467. Column D was a very low amount of new property for this school district by historical standards, and that 205,435 only rendered 9,438 of additional revenue for the school district, or not even revenue, amount being billed as a tax extension. Your EAV in column F of existing property is calculated by taking the equalized assessed valuation in column C and subtracting the EAV of new property of 205. So 507,467 minus 205,000 is 507,262. The significance of doing that calculation is to show that your existing property is something you want to define that as your ongoing homeowner, the person who's been living here for 10 years. Okay, so that's the EAV for people that are ongoing homeowners in column F. Column G is the tax rate times the existing property. So that's what your existing property has generated as far as property tax revenues. And in column I, that's the total of the taxes from new property in column D, plus the existing property in column G, E plus G equal column I. Okay, so the significance of column I is that's what you're getting in total from all sources of taxable property, whether it be new property or existing property. Now, the purpose of this is to compare that with, well, the prior year EAV. Increase the prior year EAV, which is your best definition of your existing ongoing homeowner. Take that up by a factor equaling the national CPI. Because that's what the tax cap does. And essentially, if you had absolutely no new property whatsoever, your existing tax base would experience an average increase in your tax bill equaling exactly an increase equal to the national CPI increase. So the prior year tax extension of $23.310 million increased by the tax cap CPI, which is in column K, gives a 23.706. That 23.7, let's see, I'm in the wrong year. Let's go down back to 2012. Your prior year extension in 2012 was $22,622,519. Does everybody see that number? Mm-hmm. Okay. You take the $22,622,519, increase it by 3%, you get $23,301. The difference between $23,301 and $23,313 is a negligible dollar amount of $2,438. Thereby, if you followed me thus far, it basically proves that if you take last year's extension, increase it by the national CPI, you're not going to get a difference that is in any way significant than the taxes from your existing property plus the tax rate multiplied times your new property. We're in a situation where, let's say, Costco and Chick-fil-A were the only two new pieces of property within our tax boundaries. And we knew exactly that they were going to, how much they were going to add to our tax rolls. You could say to the homeowner with absolute certainty that we're going to get, say, a combined additional $150,000 per year from those two taxpayers, and then everything we're going to get from everybody else will be an increase of 1.5%, which is the national CPI. So everyone else will have their tax bill, on the average, increase by 1.5%. Now somebody comes up to you and says, well, my tax bill went way up. Well, if your tax bill went way up, then somebody else's went down. I mean, it's a zero-sum game when you're talking about existing property. So, I guess 2012 wasn't the best example because the new property was so small. But you can run those calculations for all the other years, you come up with the same result. The proof of the pudding, so to speak, is that you can turn to your next door neighbor, somebody who lives across the street, and say, if you're an average resident with nothing unusual happening with your property, then your tax bill should go up by 1.5%. So why am I asking for 2.2? The reason why you ask for 2.2 is because that's just the value of the dollars. That $150,000 that we're actually, I'm anticipating $124,275 to come from Costco and Chick-fil-A. Okay. So those two taxpayers and any other taxpayer that right now is unknown. Again, we have no idea, and no assessor can tell you what the best case scenario is going to be. So that's why school districts, and I think that's a good transition to, maybe I should skip a page. I think I'll skip a page to page 13.
Can I ask a quick question? On 2013, where we didn't pass a levy, we was flat, I see that we still went down 1.2%.
Right.
Is that because we made a request and we got less than our request?
It's because something unexpected happened, and it's kind of, in a way, just an unexpectedly worse outcome as far as the drop in your EAV.
Okay.
Your EAV went down 6.81%. When that happened, you didn't have enough on the table, so to speak. Your request wasn't big enough to deal with the fact that in the education fund and the special education fund, the maxes that are statewide were reached. $3.50 in the education fund is the maximum anywhere in the state of Illinois. So when you hit that statewide cap on the rate in the education fund, you're done.
Mm-hmm.
And you didn't have any distribution among other funds to offset that. So one of the things that I'm presenting to you is a significant levy amount in the transportation fund. It's 100% legal for you to use the transportation fund as something that is closely connected with the educational fund, and ultimately, and this was reflected in your adopted budget, you would be, and I'm anticipating that the board would approve a transfer of some of the transportation fund balance into the educational fund. So it is legally permissible for you to levy high in the transportation fund and anticipate a transfer into the education fund.
Was putting more on the table last year an option so that we could have been zero rather than a negative 1.2, or did we hit tax caps all the way around?
Well, that's a good question. If you put more on the table, so to speak, in the educational fund, it wouldn't have done you any good.
Right.
You needed to put more on the table in a fund that didn't have that state of Illinois cap. So that's what's being recommended this time around. So I think one of the charts that I have in here shows your average. In fact, that was that residential versus commercial. Your average home value just in the past 2 years has gone from 326,000 down to 279,000. Now, if you walk up to somebody and say, "Hey, did you know your house that used to be worth 325,000 is now worth 279?" I don't think they'd take that as good news, and they probably would be saying, "Well, why is that?" The answer is, it's a bad economy for selling a home. Well, but if I just live here for a while longer, aren't my property values going to come back? And the answer to that is yes. You know, we don't believe that. I mean, I don't think it's reasonable to conclude that this low ebb in property values is going to stay that way. And I think if you ask realtors, if you talk to people who watch the housing market, and in fact the news, publicity about the housing market is coming back. Home values are rising. Just that right now, this school district still is grappling with what I would call the low ebb, the trough of that. When your property values come back, then you're no longer going to be dealing with that statewide cap of $3.50 on the ed fund. Why? Because a lower tax rate is going to generate the kind of dollars that you're still limited according to the tax cap. The only thing the tax cap does is raise the tax rate if property values fall, and if property values increase, the tax rate drops. Mm-hmm. I mean, I would say probably before 2007, the history of this school district was nothing but a declining tax rate over a long period of time, because housing values were growing by an average of 6–8% per year, and the tax cap CPI was still, averaging 2.5–3%. So the tax rate just kept on going down, down, down. Well, the opposite has happened in the last 3 or 4 years. That to me is more of an anomaly than a long-term expectation.
Does that statewide tax cap increase every year with inflation? So it's just a flat all?
It's been that way for, I would say, 50 years. The $3.50 on the tax rate has been that way in the state of Illinois for as long as I know about.
Okay.
So I appreciate your patience. I'm now on page 13, and I wanted to show you that, basically what has happened here in the past is what school districts typically do. School districts typically in column C make a request. I think, I like to make a request that a Board of Education can say to its citizens that serious study was put into this recommendation. Many school districts just say, okay, well, the truth in taxation threshold is 5%, we'll levy at 4.9% of an increase. And really, that's pretty commonplace. Now, I like to look at exactly what is the CPI that's being built into the formula, exactly what your new property expectations are, and then come up with a calculation that we can sleep at night feeling confident that we're not going to exceed. It has to be a best case scenario. But going back in time, your levy request for 2008 was obviously pertaining to phasing in a referendum, 17.1%, and the percent increase realized was only 5.2%. The next year, 9.4% was the levy requested increase. Your levy only went up by 0.1%. So all I'm saying with this is that school districts typically ask for the moon. And they know that at the end of the day, the county is going to do their tax cap formula calculations, and you're just going to get what you're going to get. The big risk, and I have a personal nightmare from this, in the sense that every time from my former employer, I would say every time you drive past I-55, the Burr Ridge Town Center, which is a beautiful development, I would tell people that worked in my school district, bow your head, because that was a significant chunk of new property for that school district. Well, the year that came on, it was a surprise. They had said it was going to come phased in over a number of years, so all of a sudden, boom, we had like $45 million in new property. If I had not been extremely optimistic in the previous year's tax levy recommendation, we would have lost out on that forever. And I would have felt really bad as a business official. So you never want to levy less than the most optimistic. I'm saying your $3 million is your most optimistic. That could be arguable, considering that you did have a $4.673 million amount of new property going back in time. Just that in discussion with your local assessor and the condition of the economy the way it is today, I think $3 million is about as optimistic as you need to be. Mm-hmm. So when you say to the public you're only asking for a 2.2% increase on the tax levy, I think you can say that that's the outcome of some analysis of the specifics, not just somebody throwing a 4.9% increase out there because that's 0.1% less than the truth in taxation rate of increase. But it's not atypical, and it's not even different from what this school district has done historically. So that's what page 13 is intended to show you. I want to go back to page 12 of your materials, and I emailed to you a new page 12. And I did it in landscape mode rather than portrait, and so there you are, and everybody needs to look at that revised version. And I think it's an improved version because I'm using the actual increase, I'm using the actual average home values. Let's see. Yeah, it's now a two-page landscape rather than being portrait. Oh, okay.
Is this your copy?
Yeah. You got it.
I have another copy.
I never took that.
Thought I didn't use it, but I did.
I think zoning was the first thing taken. Zoning.
And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because it's really water under the bridge. Last year, the difference between what you could have levied under the permissible tax rate, under the permissible tax cap, That dollar amount is in column K. That has the title of permitted but not accessed, 23.718 million. That's what you could have gotten if everything was pieced together precisely to match what was permitted. The board made a decision to give taxpayers a, from my perspective, hopefully a one-year break, and you ended up with 23.037 million, a difference of 681,000. It's important to recognize, though, that what you've done for your local community is a permanent benefit, because all the way to the right, it's calculated that an average home value of $279,600 is the fair market value for a home. That person who owns that home has received a $100.73 reduction in what they otherwise would have had to pay. And that's going to be continuing all the way out. After 5 years, that will have accumulated to 3.552 million. After 10 years, 7.506 million. And after 15 years, the local citizenry will have paid $11.9 million less than they otherwise would have under the permissible rate. So that's, to me, that's water under the bridge, but I just want to hope that this Board of Education is willing to go to the permissible rate. Going to the permissible rate is what every person in my role would recommend, because that's kind of in my credo as a business official. Always ask for as much as the tax cap will allow, because the tax cap itself is already a very constraining factor, and it does protect the homeowner, as I was going over. It does protect the homeowner. But if the Board of Education were interested in pursuing some kind of a break or a reduction in the homeowner's burden, Orland Park Municipality has a property tax rebate program. I'm not advocating it for Riverside School District 96, but I would prefer the board do that than not reach its permissible rate. Why? Because if you don't reach your permissible rate, it permanently reduces your taxing authority. It's like a reverse referendum. Your taxing ability gets cut back. You'd be better off just cutting everyone a check. Because you could do that without dropping your authority. You could just, return some of what they had paid in as far as property taxes. The difference between that kind of a system and what you experienced going from in the 2013 tax year is that you really did reduce your authority by about 2% perpetually on into the future. And in my role, that's not something that I would recommend you do. I'd rather, if you really are serious about doing something that would be a benefit to your homeowner, and I certainly sympathize with that. I'm a homeowner. I have somebody who lives in the district that's a family member. It's a good idea to be sympathetic to the homeowner and the taxpayer. But keep in mind that if you don't reach your permissible rate, it's not a one-year friendly gesture. It is a permanent sacrifice of the school district's taxing authority. So I'm not going to dwell any more on that unless the board at some point expresses interest. This doesn't even have to be tied to the tax levy. I thought, well, I'd at least share with you the idea, and it's some people would consider it an extremist or a radical idea. In fact, that's what Orland Park does. That's a municipality that's not far from where we're sitting. They do it. And why do they do it? Because they have a strong financial position. This school district does have a strong financial position, but I want to make sure that everyone understands that the strength of your cumulative cash reserves needs to be interpreted in the context of what is unreserved versus reserved for the future debt service that you have to do. And you're only in your percentile rank of the 94th percentile. That's high, and that's why I think this Board of Education decided that they had the strength to do what you did last year and give taxpayers a break. I would just like to ask you to not do it again this time around, because I'm also looking towards a future that could involve some, well, for two reasons. Number one, you should take advantage of the opportunity with Costco and Chick-fil-A. You need to capture that new property. Number two, we have Senate Bill 16 looming. Now is not the time to cut back on your fiscal strength, because the state is about to do it to you, potentially. So that's why I'm on a soapbox a little bit, and page 12 you can disregard as far as something that we would actually get going on, unless it were the pleasure of the board. If it were the pleasure of the board, I'd be glad to be one of the few school business officials that actually facilitated something like that to full fruition.
I'd be interested in that.
Pardon?
I'd be interested in looking into that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'd be curious how it works, how we could do it. If we could figure it out before we have to vote on the levy, that'd be great too.
Well, if it's the pleasure of the board, the next step would be for you to direct Bobna to ask for a legal opinion. I've already had a preliminary, cursory talk through with Aris Dalianis from Francis Bradley. I said, we're not going to formalize anything. Don't bother writing me a letter about this topic unless there was interest from the board. If there's interest in the board, then we would spend some legal fees money to have Aris give us a letter, advise us on the things that we need to be careful about. If you go on the, if you look at the ordinance, I did download the ordinance from Orland Park. It's very, very carefully worded, and there's some things that we would have some choices to make as to how to implement it. What I'm throwing out there would be the simplest way of administering it. We want to make something that can be administered fairly easily. I was just in my quick write-up was saying that you should recognize people who are ongoing homeowners. And if somebody can't say that they've been living here for 3 or more years, maybe they're not qualified under this program. But if you've been living here for 3 or 4 years and you're more of an invested homeowner, resident, then that's the kind of person who we feel is, in the good judgment of this board, a person who's committed to this community. And being committed to this community is something this board has the prerogative to value. So I think it is a rational, reasonable thing for you to think about. Just that, generally speaking, business managers don't like to give away any money. All we like to do is collect money, and then make sure that the school district is as strong as it can possibly be when it comes to meeting the needs of kids. And sometimes you end up with choices that might come back and haunt you. Yeah, we needed that fiscal strength. So be careful about how you reduce your revenue obtaining capability.
David, you mentioned that our cash reserves include the $8 million or so that we have to pay back.
Yes.
And so it would be interesting to look at it in an unreserved situation. Is it possible to do that with the percentile rank, or is it too difficult to?
I'd be glad to do that.
All right, but what about the other? What about the other 48 districts?
It's not in their ed fund, and I'm doing this just as an educational fund comparison.
Okay.
As I noticed, there's only 3 school districts that are not obtaining property tax revenues in the debt service fund. If you're not obtaining property tax revenues in the debt service fund, chances are you don't have a debt service extension base. I called those other 2 school districts and asked them about it. One of them said flat out, yes, we're in that same situation. Another one did say that they had paid off all their debt. They were going to go back into debt. I believe that they did have a debt service extension base. It's just that right now they were, as you were describing earlier, in a hiatus of using it. So, I guess I would need to be careful about how I went about it, but I think it is a worthy exercise to try and make those comparisons as apples to apples, comparable as possible.
Yeah.
But what I would advocate is that the Board of Education transfer the entire amount that's due into your debt service fund. It doesn't have to sit in your education fund. And I'm scratching my head looking at your financial statements and saying, well, if you do have that as reserved, and I would consult with our attorney about that, but I'm pretty sure that there's no reason why you can't just let that money go right into the debt service fund. I better be careful with that, because the reason that I'm hesitating is I don't want to reduce the board's ability to draw interest that would benefit your educational programs. So maybe instead of going into the debt service fund, you put it into the working cash fund, because I know you can benefit from the interest you accumulate in the working cash fund. So, but getting it out of the educational fund, to me, makes sense, because then it makes you less comparable to every other school district when you're looking at educational fund financial position, which is what I'm trying to do. You know, and some people say that what I'm doing is kind of over granular, and but I like I like making those comparisons, and I think it is worthy information for you to know how you compare on some of those key financial indicators.
Do you know offhand if you can move it from the education fund to the working cash fund? Or is that something you need to explore legally of whether we can do that or not?
Absolutely everything we would do would have to be signed off by
Right,
Chapman and
okay.
Cutler.
I don't know. Yeah.
I wouldn't bring anything to the board that was not Chapman and Cutler certified as just fine.
Okay. But that would make more sense based upon what you're saying now.
Yeah, I mean, from a just common sense perspective, that money is reserved, and it's reserved for paying on future debt. I just wouldn't want you to lose out on the opportunity to draw that interest for educational purposes. So that's what I'd have to figure that out.
Okay.
We're kind of brainstorming. On
Great
that
ideas.
point. The rest of this. Well, I'm already up to page 15, 14, 15. This is a financial projection. I think we could, in the interest of time, I would just open it up. We can come back to this financial projection if you have questions about it. The current year is looking just fine. Year to date, as far as your expenditures and revenues as adopted in the budget. And I do believe you're going to come in under budget on your salaries. And actually, I think what I'd like to do is look forward to the next Finance Committee meeting and revisit the financial projection, because I had thought that the audit would be complete as of this point, but it's not. So I'll get the audited numbers. I was supposed to get them last week, and I'll revise the financial projection based upon what the auditor has signed off on. That's much more valuable for you to know that those have been signed off on by the auditor. On page 16, I guess we don't really need to spend any time on page 16. You've heard me say something that I think has hopefully sunk in. We live and die by the national CPI. You can take all the other factors of the tax cap and make them aberrantly high or aberrantly low, and they don't compare to what happens if the CPI comes in unexpectedly high or unexpectedly low. New property is the next most important factor. But even if you vary I'm looking at scenarios number 2 and 3. If the CPI comes in 1 percentage point lower than what I'm forecasting, at 1% instead of 2% over the next 10 years on the average, then you'd have $2.69 million less money to work with. If the CPI comes in 1% higher at an average of 3%, averaging, and it really for a long time it was averaging 2.7%, so 3% isn't all that far-fetched. If we came in at 3% on the average over the next 10 years, you'd have $3.06 million more. So, that's why one of the final charts that I have, or tables I have, is, I'll turn ahead to page 18. This is what I use to track the CPI every month. And right now, this is the history going back to 1999, and all the CPIs are shown here. This is how the month-by-month CPI as it's posted by the Federal Bureau of Labor and Statistics. Right now, we're looking at about 1.7%, which is pretty much the same as we've had. That was 2 years ago, and it'd be nice if that were a little higher, but that's what the numbers are pointing to right now. The rest of what's in the appendix, I think I'll skip unless any board member wants me to explain any given page. These are running out those scenarios, applying the tax cap formula year by year on the pages through page 31. And then starting on page 32, I'm sure that some board members might be interested in seeing school districts that you know and where they are. I was asked a question recently on page 35. This is what I would call, in a very, let's call it presumptuous manner on my part. I would overgeneralize that you're being positioned at the 77th percentile. The school districts that are, 5 to 10 positions above you and 5 to 10 positions below you are the school districts you're most comparable to. And those are the school districts that if I were to survey other school districts for, well, what do you do, for example, in terms of square footage per custodian? What do you do in terms of what you pay substitute teachers? What do you do? Make up whatever you want to compare. Those are the school districts that I would call. Why? Because they're the most like you as far as your fiscal strength. So I'm perhaps overemphasizing page 35, but from just a numbers guy's perspective, it's a very important page for me. Another very important page is your per capita tuition charge on page 37. This is what you spend per pupil. And if I'm a parent, I would like to make sure that when my student comes to one of your schools that you're investing to a certain comparable level to other school districts that I'm familiar with. And we're at 10,655 in this particular continuum. And I think one of the reasons why Senate Bill 16 exists is because you do have some school districts that on a per capita tuition charge have, they're getting into the $18,000, $19,000 per pupil dollar amount. That's a pretty large dollar amount compared to the school districts at the very bottom of that continuum. They're spending $7,000 per pupil. So this is kind of a haves and have-nots state, and maybe that's just the way it is in the world. School districts that are located where people are residing that have wealth have higher expectations for the educational standards that their students are enjoying while they're going to school. But I think the goal of Senate Bill 16 is to flatten this a bit and have a closer distribution of how much money is spent per pupil. Unfortunately, that's supposed to be what the foundation level is at the state level, the state formula, but the state has never found the recommended foundation level to be affordable. And that's a whole other discussion. I would say that page 35 and page 37 are from my perspective, the most important when you want to look at other schools and see them by name. And then the last section of the appendix is just the fund-by-fund financial projection, which again, I think I probably just need to do that again for you after the final audit is completed, which I actually thought was going to be done. And then the last thing I wanted to show you, which I sent out to you in legal size paper, but In my hand, it's it's property tax collections log, and I'm just going to read you the numbers of your tax refunds. So in tax year, in fiscal year 2013-14, last fiscal year, you had to give back, because of the settlement of objections and refunds, $152,000. The next year, or the previous year, 12-13, $356,000. The previous year to that was $1.129 million. Previous year to that was $1.466 million. So those were some amazingly large years. Then in the 10-11 fiscal year, $746,000 going back. In 10-11, $864,000. I'm hoping you're getting a sense that this is a bit of a roller coaster. And in 09-10, $1.277 million. It's kind of an area where you're in jeopardy all the time. So just, it's important that the board be aware that A, that is the truth of the matter, and B, you should know that this is being tracked. Every time there's a property tax distribution, we're entering it into this log, looking at it, and if something comes along that is a knock your socks off tax refund, we're going to come back to you and tell you why, because I can get that from the county. Most recent one that was a knock your socks off number was it was out of the North Riverside Mall. It was a refund to your big retailers in your North Riverside Mall. So either way, when you think about a long-term financial projection, keep in mind that is an area that you're going to experience a financial roller coaster, most likely, if the future is anything like history. And someone in my role or Bob in this role is always in jeopardy of having to come to you with bad news. I can't believe that 13-14 was only $152,000 of tax refunds. That was a banner year as far as avoidance of tax refunds. So that's my entire presentation at this point. I'd like to ask if we need to go back to any specific page.
David, you made reference to the last year's was like 4.8%, or the tax levy percentage, or 4.9.
Let's see. I'd be turning to page 13 in your packet. How in column C, there was the levy request was 4.9% for 2 years consecutive.
Yeah, 4.9. And this year it's 2.2?
Correct.
Can you summarize the difference between last year, 4.9 and 2.2? What's...
It's actually 2 years ago, I think.
I guess the difference is somewhat philosophical and somewhat just, it's a reflection of the CPI. This year, the CPI is only 1.5%. And I think one of those years it came in at 4.1%. And if a person is expecting a large amount of new property as being possible, then they need to levy high. So I think as concisely as I can answer that question, it's mainly the CPI is the difference. And then combined with the CPI, new property expectations. And then, as I kind of intimated, I think some school districts just levy a huge number that maybe they don't even consider to be realistic, knowing that it doesn't matter. Because the only downside is if you don't levy enough. If you levy too much, it doesn't matter, because the county is going to come along and cut it down to what the tax cap formula determines as the calculation anyway. The downside to going really high is that you might get a phone call from your local taxpayer that's reading the truth in taxation notice and say, I demand an explanation. And if your explanation is not really, somewhat sophisticated, then they might not think you're doing your job with as much precision as you otherwise might.
Can we give them your phone number?
Sure.
Okay. All right.
Well, I've taken those phone calls. Well, the first thing I do is I look at their tax bill going back 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
I say, what is your name? And I immediately do a find on their name, and I make a spreadsheet, and I say, well, over the past 5 years, your average increase has been, and I give them their percentage. And I say, by the way, yeah, this year was probably a big number, but 2 years ago, your tax bill only went up, 1%. That's what most often happens.
Now, the only way you can get over the 5% truth in taxation amount is through the CPI and without a tax cap, without hitting a tax cap. So, again, it's driven by the CPI and
And new property.
Yeah. And new property.
The CPI, the tax cap formula is basically 3 main factors, and I was showing them as 2 of them are unknown, 1 of them is known. The unknown, the first unknown is the EAV. And this school district last year was unpleasantly surprised by an EAV number that dropped more than you'd expected it would drop. Okay, so that's a significant unknown. The other unknown is the exact amount of new property. And every assessor will say, yeah, we'll give you a good guess, but we do not have the final number because it can still change all the way up until the equalization formula is calculated.
Yeah.
And then the only factor that is truly known at the time when you adopt a levy is the CPI.
Yeah, I kind of recall that the new property estimate for last year was 400,000, and it turned out to actually be 184.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't know what the non-new was, but
and again, back to my Burbridge Town Center story, you don't want to be surprised by new property that comes on the tax rolls. If you try to be over precise and pretend like you're going to know exactly what's going to happen, you run the risk of being burned. And the trouble with being burned under the tax cap is that the consequence is permanent, because the subsequent year's base for that CPI calculation is the previous year's actual extension. So that's why, basically this school district can say that you've given all of your taxpayers a perpetual $100 tax break.
good for us, huh?
It's a good move. You've been able to earn that amount of goodwill with your taxpayers.
Yeah.
I have a question, David, on page 11. There's, regarding your 2004 projection on taxes from new property. I know there's a lot of local residents very concerned about getting our pound of flesh from Costco. The number that you have there, $124,275, is that based upon your recommended 2.2% levy?
No, actually, that's less. This is what I'm using in the financial projection. I've incorporated $2.5 million in the financial projection because I don't believe $3 million is going to happen.
Okay.
I want you to levy $3 million,
Right.
but I don't think $3 million is going to happen. I could be wrong. I want to give myself $500,000 of potential, favorable surprise.
So that's based on getting, if we were to get $2.5 million,
Yes.
that's what we would get
All
based
it is-
upon the 2.2% levy?
Right. All that is that calculation column B, which is the tax rate divided by 100 times the new
B,
property.
okay.
So it's B times D.
B times D, okay,
B times D gives you E.
okay. And that's based upon your recommendation, your recommended levy, right?
No, it's
different.
less than my recommended levy. I want you to build in $500,000 of, I don't know where it might come from.
So that's the anticipated, more realistic what we might get, because you'd said 2.2 seems to be pretty solid
Well,
based on some unknowns.
right. If I'm gonna publish a financial projection,
Yeah,
then my challenge is to come up with what I really think is going to
more
happen.
realistic.
I really think you're probably going to get about $2.5 million in new property.
Okay.
Okay, but it really wouldn't be responsible for me to tell you to rely on that, because that's just my, that's my best guess. You don't want to make a best guess with the levy. You want to build in a number that's the best possible number that you can stand to put into the tax cap formula and still maintain a straight face.
So, David, when properties sit vacant, foreclosed and so forth, how does that play into, we're always talking about new properties, but how do we lose the ability to?
Most of the time, the bank pays.
The bank pays, but at what rate? It goes.
Yeah.
I assume that the rate of taxable rate would go down.
Well, there is no variation in a tax rate. The variation is the
in
value.
the assessments. Yeah.
Yeah, the value of the property. If something is going to sit, the triennial reassessment process eventually is going to come back and say, well, what is that property worth? And if it looks like it's now a deteriorated property that should be bulldozed, then they're going to reassess it at a lower level, and that'll be reflected in your EAV in total. But in the short term, the bank is going to pay those taxes.
And what would you recommend for a healthy, what's an ideal educational fund reserve percentage to have? I know you say that we're currently at 94%, but that's not a true figure because of the $8 million that's earmarked for the debt service. So what's an ideal school district to be at? I know.
Well, Lyons Township High School, where I used to work, and I was there for 11 years, we had multiple bond issues, and I would recommend that you don't ever fall below 50% of a year of expenditures in the bank.
Okay.
Now, you might hear somebody say a lesser percentage than that, but my understanding, and I'm not, this is not my job, but I've heard enough people talk that do represent what they think Standard & Poor's and Moody's will say. If you're less than 50% of a year of expenditures in the bank, that would be a check mark on the negative side related to evaluating your school district.
Got it.
So this school district is so far away from 50% of your year of expenditures in the bank. I think your long-term financial health here is your prospects are very good.
Okay.
Your long-term prospects are very good as long as you do what I suggest you do. Don't do anything that puts you higher than the 77th percentile of, in other words, match your fiscal strength. Do things that are proportionate. How much quality can you afford? Keep that in mind as you're making decisions, and especially as you're doing collective bargaining. You need, I've always said, and this would be something I don't want anybody to repeat. You're only as financially strong as your most recently settled collective bargaining agreement, because your cost of faculty is by far your largest cost.
Good to know.
All right, in the interest of time, trying to, we got a couple more agenda times, just to review. So the recommendation will be voted on at the December 16th meeting, but we do have till final Tuesday of the month, which would be December 30th. But I believe that we'll have this voted on, to worry about the December 16th regular board meeting. So, all right, go ahead.
Just a quick question. Do we have any idea what might happen with SB 16 before before we have to vote? I know it's been passed in the Senate. And also what's happening with our potential for having a speaker talk about that in December.
Well, plenty of what happens in Springfield can pass one of the chambers and never the other. I remain hopeful that Senate Bill 16 will just die. On the other hand, to give you a more formal update, the Ed Red, the executive director for that lobbying group, she and I are going to have a conversation on November 10th and she'll be able to tell me whether or not she can make a December 2nd meeting. If she can't make December 2nd, she will be here on December 16th for sure. She knows that we would like her to have direct interaction with this board, give you an opportunity to hear her. She's down in Springfield. I'd say probably 50% of her job is spending time in Springfield. So she can give you the real details about what's going on in Senate Bill 16. But I would just like you to hear a takeaway that I keep on repeating to people that ask me about Senate Bill 16. Senate Bill 16 is truly a zero-sum game, and all of the school districts that benefit from Senate Bill 16 are offset by a school district that has money taken away. We would be a loser by about $780,000. So because it's a zero-sum game, it makes it unique and unprecedented in the nation. Okay? Those that are the proponents of Senate Bill 16 say, well, we're just doing what Massachusetts did. Well, Massachusetts, when they did a restructuring to provide for a better system of identifying schools in need and improving their financial resources, they put $1 billion into the system. So Illinois wants to do what Massachusetts did, but add no money. Now that's not very realistic. I mean, I don't think it's politically workable for them to get that through in its current form, considering that the schools that are some of the most losing are losing like 80% of their state revenue. You know, I think when you talk about 80% of a funding source being all of a sudden knocked out, that's a trauma for that school district. And there are literally hundreds of school districts that would be experiencing financial trauma. So I don't think Senate Bill 16, and I hope that Karen Valadez, you can ask her that question. You know, does Mr. Sellers, is his pessimism about Senate Bill 16, is there any, do you agree or disagree with that? You know, I'm pessimistic about Senate Bill 16 making it, because I think it's too draconian. So we'll see what happens. I know that school districts are sounding an alarm. They're trying to get their constituents involved, trying to get to your legislator, make a difference as far as hounding Springfield to put the brakes on it. And certainly it would be a good idea for this school district to add your voice to those that believe that Senate Bill 16 is too much. It's too extreme in taking away from some school districts and giving to others. They should have just focused their attention on the general state aid formula. So that's a long-winded answer to your question.
All right. Yeah,
All right. Thank you very much. Yeah, we'll try and move down the agenda as quickly as possible in the interest of time and provide updates. The other discussion or new business was credit card procedures. And if we could have an update or a briefing on that, David.
And this is the other packet that I sent out. This packet covers the remainder of the agenda items that I would be prepared to talk about. We've already, as I mentioned in the past, cut back on the use of a general purpose credit card. We, I think, have come up with a reasonable system for utilizing a credit card only when it's absolutely needed, and from the standpoint of accountability. There's a person, the assistant, my direct assistant, has got the job of keying it all into an Excel spreadsheet and being prepared to send that to the board every month. So I think that's a system I'd like to try out and put in the motion. We've actually already started implementing it, and I think it's working out just fine. Some people have questioned, well, how come I can't do something today that I've done in past years? And the answer is, well, because we're adopting a system that has best practices as far as keeping tabs on the use of a general purpose credit card. There's your
David,
answer.
I had a question for you on that. You know, at the bottom of your memo, you say individual purchases shall be made only under exceptional circumstances. Then you say when a vendor requires a credit card and/or there is a need for an emergency purchase. I agree with you, and I'm happy that there's going to be some sort of checks and balance and control. But the first portion there, when a vendor requires a credit card, seems to be very open, because nowadays, you know, especially with a lot of internet purchasing, vendors require credit cards for almost everything. So is that not just a backdoor to, you know?
I think we've kept a lid on it.
Okay.
You know, I think there's still, vendors still know that there's a value in them getting paid. And if we require that they accept a purchase order, then, and we just say that's our practices, there's a fair chance we can do it.
Right.
Okay, the vendors that absolutely refuse to do business with us unless we give them a credit card are typically hotels. You know, for some reason, that type of commercial activity is unrelenting. And it could be just the nature of their business. So there are certain vendors, and when we keep this log, we're going to keep the log to include, you know, a statement as to why was it absolutely necessary. But yeah, I understand it is somewhat open-ended, and the use of a credit card is much more pervasive. I mean, there were times when I used to use cash. You know, we all use debit cards now. But you know, I think we're going to persist and just use that general purpose credit card as little as possible and tell people that if there's any other way to do the transaction, we'll do it the other way. And the first choice is a purchase order.
So then there's a purchase order with regards to a vendor. At the top of your piece, you also talk about the fact that there was a practice for reimbursing, say, travel expenses, or it sounds like, you know, maybe other purchases that were being made by staff members. So those sorts of things are not going to be done on this credit card, or are they?
Again, if it's a hotel or an airfare, it probably will be done using this general purpose credit card. If it's, you know, professional development, Dr. Gannon, you know, does a great job of overseeing all of those types of activities, but, you know, he understands that this is something that the board is very much interested in. And so we know where the areas are of our operation that we need to watch closely. That's definitely one of them, is staff travel.
We've also, if I can just add too, we've done a lot of research on different vendors, and we are now working with some different vendors that do take POs and getting, you know, so far getting most of the resources that we need. When in the past, we didn't know that these vendors even existed necessarily. It was just, we'd get the same materials for about the same price, but we would just, you know, do it the way that we knew how to do it. So it's been helpful for us to go through the process and to identify, you know, vendors that do take POs.
The key to this is us providing you with that monthly report. I mean, you can certainly be the judge for yourself as far as and give us feedback if you see something that you're concerned about. And you know, it'd be our job to make adjustments if something happens that you're not comfortable with.
And how many credit cards are we going to have? General purpose, one or two?
Just one.
Okay.
And everything is done by Pearl Cervantes, who, you know, you know, while we're doing this transition, we've had to, you know, do some things where other people have used their past use of a credit card. But, you know, we're getting to a point where the procedure is clear, and it includes Pearl being the person that does the charging, and putting it into the law. So as long as we, and if someone doesn't like that because it's too cumbersome, then, you know, they may end up putting it on their own personal credit card, and then coming to the school district and saying, okay, I incurred this expense, now I want to be reimbursed. Well, that still leaves us the option to say no, or to say, okay, yeah, we understand that you did that, and now we'll provide you with reimbursement. But what we don't want people to think is that we're just handing the credit card to people for them to go shopping with. That's not happening.
Very good. This is this is something we don't have to vote on. This is just a new policy and procedure that's been instituted district-wide. The third item on the agenda is a PMA debt certificate scenario and analysis, which David outlined in the packet that he prepared for us, and that the recommendation is that we not pay off that debt certificate. So, David, go ahead.
PMA is not proposing that we do it because this debt is not callable. I mistakenly thought in the past when we brought up this topic that this debt might be callable. It's not, and the interest rate that got locked in is higher than the interest rate that would be on a going forward basis. Therefore, you'd miss an opportunity for, if interest rates go up on returns on investment, you want to be able to take advantage of those. But because they're non-callable, that's why PMA is saying they wouldn't advise it. And I said to the person from PMA, well, I'll just bring it up to the board. If the board wants more information, then I could have you come to a meeting to present it in greater detail. But at this point, I don't know if I'd recommend that you take that time, because on its face, due to the debt being non-callable, I don't think it's a good idea, because I personally have heard people talk very optimistically, and sometimes I don't really agree with them, but that interest rates are going to come back sometime. Within the next 3 or 4 years, you might be able to get 3 or 3.5% on a CD. If we went into this defeasance, it would be a locked-in contract, and it would be based upon an expectation that your rate of return on invested money would be no better than 1.76%. I'm hoping that that's just too conservative of an expectation. And of course, they would be willing to sell that to us, because then they would come out money ahead. I don't want PMA to come out money ahead. I want us to come out money ahead.
Thank you.
Fourth agenda item, Mayor Rose, if you want to lead the discussion or ask about the types of financial reports that are presented to the board and at committee meetings, what we're looking for here, what's a waste of your time. The best is, to have this discussion, what kind of reports we need, or what kind of reports, we should not be getting.
Yeah, looking actually for your recommendations. Sorry.
Well, to make to give you the shortest answer, I don't recommend that you really change much. I think you've got a pretty decent system in place. The only thing that I would do is become very well versed in what I'm intending to produce for you every month, which is this top page. This top page, first of all, the board, as I've been doing this kind of a job for a while, it's important that the board consider every finance committee meeting to be a meaningful experience. So if there's a need for us to peel back layers of the onion, explore topics related to school finance, get into some depth and the meat of what's going on with your money, then the board finance committee meetings should be used as the venue for that primarily. When you talk about just what you did on a monthly basis, this top page is, from my perspective, the most important thing you're getting, and the rest of it is a lot of detail that you may or may not need. This top page is my challenge as far as estimating where are we headed, and generally speaking, in the beginning months of the year, I'm not going to give you much different of a guess than the adopted budget, because the year is just too green. It hasn't developed far enough for me to see any substantive pattern. At this point in time, though, I'm anticipating a $431,000 under budget in salaries in the educational fund, and in the operations and maintenance fund, $17,592 under budget because of the way the year is developing. So I think it's important that every month you get this piece of paper in this format, and then if you have questions about it, at the regular board meeting, let's talk about it. But just, to give you my honest opinion of this, your level of depth in terms of knowing where we stand and how the budget is developing, I'm giving it to you on one side of one sheet of paper. And if you just, absorb this, then I think you've got the information you need as a board member. And if you think about other things that you'd like to know, it could be that what you're talking about is worthy of a finance committee agenda item.
Okay.
So that's how I feel about that right now.
I know that prior to your arrival, we had determined that maybe quarterly it would be good just for the, for the camera to do a budget to actual, to talk about that a little bit. But after a quarter, first quarter, it's not going to say much, is it? Budget to actual.
Right.
It's green.
But what this does is this takes the prior fiscal year right up to the current date. I did this afternoon.
Okay.
I'm taking July 1 of 2013 to today's date of 2013.
Okay.
And running out those numbers. That's in column B.
Okay.
That's for last fiscal year. And then I do the same thing for this current fiscal year in column E. So your budget to actual is the comparison between D and E. And when you compare A and B to D and E, you get a sense of the progress that we've made. And that's calculated in column C. So, we're at this time last year, for example, in salaries in the educational fund, we had spent 20.6% of our budget. Not the budget. Excuse me. We spent 20.6% of what actually was spent by the end of the year. And at this point, our $2.516 million is only 18.8% of the budget of $13.38 million. That's why I'm coming up with a projected actual in column G that is less. So I think when you talk about looking at it quarterly, I'm actually looking at it right up to the day when I send out the board material.
Okay.
Because I'm processing this at the transaction level right up to the day. And it's very useful for me because then I'm capturing the most recent payroll. And it's helpful for me. This is the tool that I will use. I'll be looking at this on a maybe twice a week basis as you get closer to the end of the fiscal year, and apprising the board, okay, here's what it's looking like. Sometimes I'm right on, and sometimes I'm not. But what I want to do is at least let the board see what I'm considering a high priority tool to figure out where we think the year is going to end.
Okay.
All right. Mary Rose, again, you had a couple questions about where we're at with the employee and community food budget.
Yeah, just mentioning or remembering from a year ago, we had established an $18,000 employee food budget. We actually didn't talk at all about, the community, what, we might do for, I think there's a couple, sort of one luncheon or two luncheons for the PLT.
I believe there's two. There was one at the beginning of the year and one at the end of the year.
And I was just wondering, I don't know, David, if you had a chance, because I didn't really request it, sort of what last year's amounts in both of those categories might have come out to. They were going to capture it, at least the employee food on the district level in one account.
Well, from what I could find out it didn't translate into changing the general ledger. So I'm changing the general ledger. We've created, I think, probably, let's say 15 new accounts. And the way we did that was I talked with Nancy Schumann, who works in accounts payable. I explained to her the situation. I said, what would you do with this? And where should we add new accounts? She came up with the schema that she felt would encompass all of the purchasing of this nature, where we're buying food that is consumed by employees, for meetings, for whatever purpose that relates to staff development or other types of things. So we've added a number of accounts. I have not taken the time to try and retrospectively reconstruct what would have been the charge to those accounts in prior years, but I think on a going forward basis, this really should be a permanent change to the chart of accounts, so that whenever something is being recorded as a cost to the district of that nature, that it's going to be charged in an account that we can easily then track on a multi-year basis. But it really hasn't been in the past.
Are we doing something separate as well in terms of an account for the community food budget? I know we didn't really get into that last year, but
I don't understand.
I think, would that be the PLT luncheons?
that or just any, what?
Well, I guess it depends, because we have the PLT luncheons, but then typically in the past, we've had for our BPAC, Bilingual Parent Advisory Committee, we've just been bringing in, treats on our own, but.
There's not enough activity to make it worthwhile?
I don't know, you know what, we've really cut back on that, we really have, so I don't know how much would actually go in there to tell you the truth, in my opinion.
But I think you looked at the chart of accounts, and I think we're comfortable that we have a way of breaking it out. And Nancy knows that I'm a stickler when it comes to charging the purchase or the cost to the account that best matches it's you. You don't charge something that just because there's money in the account. That's a no-no. You charge money in a way that matches the coding schema of our accounting structure. So I think we're going to be I haven't gotten any feeling that that's not something we can just get done.
I don't know if anybody else has any comments. Last year, we established an $18,000 budget amount for employee-related food. Anybody have any thoughts on?
I think Bob and Brian and I have talked about it. I think it's a reasonable dollar amount.
Okay.
We're going to target that, and if we see that as being, for any reason, difficult to deal with, we would bring it to attention. I hope by the end of the year, because we're going to have this in a different accounting scheme, that we can just show you that, okay, here's all the accounts for which all these things were charged. It's $18,000 or less, including the retirement or recognition event, and we made it. We were able to stay within that understanding as a budget.
Okay.
Does that include gift card purchases?
If the gift card purchase is from a student activity account and it's fundraised money, we have much less control.
I don't know, yeah.
Well, we should not be buying gift cards as a school district out of board money.
I don't know where it's coming from.
Gift cards get purchased because people do fundraising. They sell cookie dough or things like that.
I don't think that's happening, but this is something that's coming up, and looking back at historical purchases, there's significant gift card purchases, and so that's something that I think that is even, that we need to take a look at too.
I'm somewhat familiar with what you're alluding to. That is off of our radar screen.
Okay.
And is not something, as far as I'm concerned, a gift card is going to happen in a school system when the cheerleaders or the basketball team decide to pool money, but even that has to be constrained by the Gift Ban Act. So we have staff orientation on the Gift Ban Act, so that people do not receive a gift that is greater than a nominal or is commemorative in nature. That's it. Otherwise, the word gift card wouldn't be in our vocabulary.
Well, what did we do this year? I think we still discussed gift cards. I don't, that's why it's starting to, again, this keeps coming up, is where is it being paid? It's how much did we purchase last year, if we did, and what fund is it coming from?
Gift cards for what? I mean.
The retirement dinner.
Yeah, the
One.
retirement dinner, there was distributed gift cards. And
Yeah,
I think I saw that it was purchased, it was on one of the credit cards, I believe, that's where I saw it. Like it's still, there's something recent that I noticed it's still happening. So, I
Have you
guess,
seen it recently on a recent?
credit card statement would have been last spring,
Last
around the
spring,
same time,
okay, so
right.
Is this a gift from the board?
I don't know. It's considered, it's just something the district apparently has been doing for years.
Were they given at the employee recognition dinner?
Presumably. Yeah,
For
it's about the time it's being
For those
purchased.
employees that retired?
Well, then that should be out of a board account. And anyway, I think that would be something we would have to get back to on, but, I just don't think a quote-unquote gift card is anything that's gonna happen around here except on a real, an anomaly, a very rare occurrence. The board has the prerogative to do whatever they want as far as employee recognition. Typically, a gift card would not be it, and you would get somebody something that would be a gift that recognizes them and their service to the school system. Usually that comes in the form of something they can put on their mantelpiece or something.
Gold medallion.
It would say Riverside District, School District 96 on it as a gift. I don't think giving anybody anything that would be cashable, like a gift card can be, that I think would be not really done.
How?
Am I speaking out of turn?
No, I don't work in applied philosophy. This is like do you know if they were for the retirees, or we don't even know?
I don't know.
They were from my recollection, they were for retirees or people that reached a certain amount of level.
Recognition.
Correct, yeah, but at the same time, I don't think we're talking, $4,000 or anything like that. You're talking probably about a $300 to $500 amount total that we'd purchased.
I would just advocate that the school district spend money to recognize long-term employees by giving them something that's commemorative. And that falls squarely within the Gift Ban Act as something that's allowed. The Gift Ban Act is not very friendly towards giving people anything but the most nominal amount of cash. So you want to lean in the direction of things that are commemorative.
Is this something we,
Thank you.
What's
kind of
what's
gesture.
nominal amount of cash? Like
The number I've been using is like $40. I thought that, well, if you can buy a fairly expensive T-shirt for $40. That's what I used at my former employer. Anything above $40 would be a no-no. And even if a group of kids got together and pooled their money, so that a bunch of parents threw in and it accumulated to a couple $100, that is not something that can be given to a teacher.
it's
Really?
not something to be given to a
That would
teacher?
be a violation of the Gift Ban Act.
okay. Well,
So-
we have some policies to come up with.
That's a no-no.
Good to know.
It's on the books.
Yes, I know you're
With the-
referring to, yeah.
Right, so people need to be educated about that, and they need to be told that even if a bunch of really warm-hearted people get together and pool some money, it still can't accumulate to greater than what is considered a
40 bucks.
nominal dollar amount, about $40. And there's an exception to that if the person were to get something that was worth $80, they can avoid doing something that's a no-no under the Gift Ban Act if they take a $40 check and make it out to the American Cancer Society, and they prove that they have given a voluntary contribution to a not-for-profit to offset anything that's in excess of what considers nominal. The way to stay totally away from this entire topic is to have gifts that are commemorative. If you want to say that you love somebody because they're doing a great job, get them something that's a plaque or you know, some doohickey that they can put on their mantle. That's the best way to express appreciation. The worst way is with cash.
How can we educate? Because I know, I mean, I think we're all sitting here knowing that this is the practice that's been going on, the children collecting and
I've had a lot of
parents.
years of experience educating staff on this topic.
Yes, staff, and I think maybe the like parent volunteer community.
It's a
I
parent
think they have no
volunteers.
idea that, because they've been collecting.
They just need to be told.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They need to have
A
it
memo.
explained to them that it's black and white.
So I just want to clarify, this is not happening at the district level, with the exception of, from our knowledge, of at the retirement dinner.
Correct.
But what you're talking about is class parties or a specific.
Christmas
gift or-
present.
gifts.
Right.
End of the year.
Christmas gift.
Returning gifts or end of the year gifts
Yeah.
where parents are having
Yes.
a collection.
Yes.
And giving it to a teacher.
Correct.
And gift card format.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Say the
Got
room
it.
parents
Okay.
are collecting money from parents, purchasing gift
Understand.
cards,
All right.
and giving them way exceeding the
Yeah. I
think it's
nominal
$100.
number.
Yeah.
I've been very successful at this because I've gotten calls from teachers that will say, they just gave me, what can I do? And my answer is, don't take it, or your other option is to make a documented
Yeah.
contribution to a not-for-profit in an amount that offsets the dollar amount that you received as a gift. That's the only way that you can proceed without having done a nominal.
I think it's just a situation where we're going to have to, I mean, there's lots of good intentions involved here, but I just don't think that they realize, or that
It does.
we realize that
It does
it's
put
a
the.
violation.
It does put the pressure on some parents. I mean, you get emails and notices about and Christmas present gifts
Right.
and end of the year gifts
A
and
computer-based tutorial.
and
That sounds lovely. That
Pass it
sounds like a
around.
very good thing.
Yeah.
All right, well,
Computer-based
let's,
tutorial
yeah,
on this topic, and it's been done by everybody who's an employee for the past 11 years where I used to work. So it is important to educate the staff that they can accept gifts. And it's important for board members to know that.
And we
It's
got to
very
educate.
important for any administrator to know that. You can't accept a gift.
You know, different places that I've worked, they actually make you sign that ethics statement every year. Can we rig up something like that where it's computerized and?
In my former employer, we actually made them do a tutorial.
So David, when the parents, when a classroom representative, that's a volunteer person, right? I mean, it's a parent that serves as the classroom representative. Do they have any standing within the school district or
If there's a person.
or recognized?
If there's a person who gets confused and feels like they're not being, treated well by the school district in terms of this prohibition against a gift, I would just hand them a copy of the statute language and just say, this is the law. You can look it up yourself. Okay? Just, realize that the reason why the Gift Ban Act exists is so that some person doesn't have undue quid pro quo with a person in power, which can be a teacher. So, every teacher should know that it is absolutely wrong for them to create a situation where anybody might have, other than a purely even-handed arrangement with the person in authority. And a gift is a prohibited gift if it's greater than a nominal amount. That's all.
well, I think we move this topic into policy and explore that, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news for teachers that now they're just gonna get T-shirts or I taught third grade and all I got was a lousy T-shirt. Something like that. So, man, very, very good. Well, very educational.
I do, just one quick question. Perishable food doesn't come under the Gift Band Act?
$75 per calendar day is the limit.
Okay. All
I'm
right.
looking at it now.
Perishable foods?
Yes,
Yes, I had
So
heard that.
what,
per person.
what does that mean? What's $75 per person? Can you put that into some sort of perspective for me? Give me an example, or,
I'm just looking, isn't a lot of Teacher Appreciation Week about lunches and food and?
With one of Bob's reports to the board that have routinely, I can provide her with what I've kept on file for all these years. That is the right of when the Gift Band Act. The board can read it, everybody can read the same document, and then come up with any questions. But it's pretty much, it's black and white, and it's right out of the school board.
We have adopted it in our policies, by the way, already. I mean, it's just, the state law exists, but I think the problem is that we don't, our rules, our procedures don't match what our policy is. So we just need to bring that up to speed.
I think we need to educate our PTAs and
Yes.
PTOs and just give them that information and then just make sure that the principals are uniformly adhering to it.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Yes, thanks. All right.
We're 5 minutes over time. What I'd like to do is move, can we move the district lunch program to the next meeting? And I want to get the Copier replacement recommendation in so we can vote on it at the December 16th meeting.
Well, I have some news for you on that. We have a contractual issue with our current maintenance agreement that I just found out about, so I'm going to have to, Don Farno is
It's over there.
there it is. So Don and I have talked about it. I'm right now feeling very doubtful that we'll be bringing forward a recommendation at the November meeting to replace copiers, because with this maintenance agreement being an obligation for the next few months, I don't want to get into a fight with this. The company is saying that they will keep their copiers running. We've been having some problems with copiers. And if those copiers, this one site in particular, where we've been having problems, if they can't make those things work, then somebody's going to have to sleep, or we'll get a cot, and the repairman will have to live at the school.
To repair it, right?
But they're contractually obligated to keep those things running. So, anyway, the winner is Conica, Minolta, but I think we need to get back to you on this
Right,
topic.
to go that
because-
route, you're saying to go that route means that we would break the maintenance contract
we
and it
can't-
might be cost
Yeah,
prohibitive.
and Rico is raising their hand and saying, hey, wait, you haven't factored it in, and they're right. We weren't aware that they're going to assert their quote-unquote contractual right, per this agreement. They're not just walking away.
Okay.
They're going to fight us on this, and I think we need to talk to them some more. And, they're also saying, oh, we'll sweeten the deal. We'll do, so anyway, copiers are a real pain.
Yeah.
To talk, because companies the competition is so severe. But right now, we went through what I think was an exemplary process. Don did a great job of shopping, getting everything together. We asked for proposals, we got them, we prepared them, and now this is kind of a monkey wrench that's being thrown into the process. At the same time, because it's now quote unquote up for grabs, if Rico wants to, give us, they want to give us the store, we'll listen.
Right.
I mean, I want to come back to the board with the best deal that we can possibly get for you, regardless of what company it is. We just want the best deal.
Okay.
Any
David,
comments you'd like to add, Don?
Well, when we were contacted by the Rico rep today, originally they had said that the contract expirations were March. And they did follow up that there was a renegotiation of those contracts a few years ago that put those to August. So I also talked with our Conica rep, since we found out, and they want to take a look at the contracts as well to see what they can do in perhaps offsetting those costs, those service costs. So we're kind of back in to a reevaluation of proposals again for it.
Okay. John, are you looking prospectively at purchasing these copiers from Minolta, or are you looking at leasing them?
We did look at it both ways.
I've been a proponent of purchase, because a lot of times you don't know what the useful life of a copier can be.
Which is not, now they get so obsolete so quickly.
True, but depending upon their usage. And sometimes the usage in a particular location can be less than what you anticipated. And so I've experienced where you can make a copier last for 5 to 7 years, and if you did it on a lease, you can come out money ahead. And we do have a number of copiers out there that may be beneficial for us to have owned rather than leased, because we get a longer useful life than normal.
And then are you getting maintenance agreements for those old copiers? Because
Yeah.
based on my experience, the maintenance on those things
Right.
and the toner and those things costs
Right.
more than the machines do ultimately.
That's something that Don has done a good job of evaluating. We've told the companies how they stack up compared to their competition. You know, what is it, .004 is a number that we're finding, and as long as they're able to reach that, that's a pretty decent number of maintenance cost per copy, and it's got to include consumables and guaranteed uptime, etc. The problem is that if you buy a copier and the copy counts accumulate slower than you've anticipated, it might not get to its useful life for 6 or 7 years. And so then the school district comes out running ahead. If you end up burning through what would be a normal useful life in terms of number of copies in a shorter number of years, you might have to buy a new copy in a lesser number of years. We looked at 100 page per minute. I would love to recommend 100 page per minute copiers, but at our usage volume levels, that would mean that we would be having a 20-year useful life on something that's supposed to last 15 million copies. So I think we're still back in the 75 page per minute or 65 page per minute as far as our, and I would still recommend that we purchase them, because you can come out money ahead sometimes.
All right, we'll move on to updates as far as internal controls and auditor. If there's anything on the auditing report was supposed to be due. Well, we'll start with internal controls. Sorry, moving out of turn here.
Well, the documentation of internal controls, I shared. Actually, the tool that we have in use in the business office, it didn't get copied in color. And, well, first of all, this is something that's laminated and put on the wall in every person's office that has purchasing responsibility. So here's your flow chart. Abide by the rules, use purchase orders. This is a one-sided, one piece of paper explanation of what you should know and the rules you should follow when you're doing purchasing. This is meant for everybody in the organization to see. A teacher, any kind of administrator, anybody that has any interaction with the purchasing function. That I think is a good step forward in terms of your internal controls. As far as what would be the concern of your independent auditor to demonstrate that we have documented our internal controls procedures. This is, I put draft number 1 here because I think this is something that is not going to be 100% done until probably the end of this school year. I need to schedule meetings with multiple iterations of review of this. First step is to verify that this document accurately captures everything that we're doing. And then after we've captured everything that we're doing, we need to talk to the auditing firm and say, you know, what would you suggest we do to change practices? We fall in the category of a school district that has so few people working in the business office and who have, you know, these types of responsibilities that, you know, we don't have the optimal internal controls because there's, you know, you just don't have enough people involved. For example, everything in green is our, you know, that's our bookkeeper function, who is the finance and payroll specialist. Everything in blue is the person who is responsible for accounts, I'm sorry, for human resources, and everything in brown is the accounts payable person. So we have 3 people that do most of our internal controls. Everything in white is other than those 3 people. So, you know, we're looking at all of this, and I think this is a good tool. It asks the question, you know, who initiates the process, how is the process initiated, who records the activity, how is the activity recorded, who processes the items, how are the items processed, who reconciles, and how are the items reconciled. Those are your standard internal controls questions and answers. I think an auditing firm would say that we're on the right path as far, and this is the tool that I've used in the past. And it's passed muster with an auditing firm. You say, okay, this is a good documentation of your internal control. At the end of the process, when we're confident that this is 100% accurate, and I think this is probably about 90% accurate where we are right now, I would say we, you know, have made some pretty good progress to get to where we are. The you know, like I said before, I think then we need to ask the question, are there areas where we should enhance our internal controls by having someone sign off on this on a monthly basis? Should we have every journal entry signed off by me and the superintendent? Something like that, on a monthly basis. Having more eyes on every process is an important part of internal controls. I guess another thing to underscore is that you do have a township treasurer, and the township treasurer is a very integral part of all of your internal controls. And you know, the proviso township treasurer office would argue that they're a very important operation. The fact that the township treasurer function doesn't exist outside of Cook County makes it a debatable question, but I would say that the township treasurer office does provide a layer of internal controls that needs to be recognized and used. We should use the township treasurer office and recognize when they are adding to our internal controls. And they would certainly say that they are doing important work for us on a regular basis to help us maintain good internal controls. So that's where we are on that topic. I think, you know, at the end of the year, I'll probably give you a report and say, this is how far we got. You know, next year, you might want to take it to another level, but this is as far as I was able to get this year.
And then auditor report and update.
Well, I want to be, you know, forthcoming with you. I had to make a decision when the auditors were here, and I did say to the auditing firm, go ahead and give us a modified accrual report. And I you know, talked to Bob about it. I said, look at their price. It's unbelievable. You know, they're adding only $1,025 to take us to modified accrual. I don't think they made any money on that, because I think they had to put in a significant amount of time in order to accomplish that. But you know, I shared with you this entire engagement letter, and at the end of it, it shows you that their base report is $8,750, and to go to a modified accrual, it's $1,025. I think I made a comment when we talked about this topic before that, going shopping and, seeing what auditing firms might sharpen their pencils to get a better deal than your current auditing firm is advisable. But at this price, I wouldn't call it a high priority, because I don't think you're going to get a more economical price on your audit. And at this point in time, I was talking with Bob about it. I was saying, you as a Board of Education have a lot on your plate this year. Collective bargaining is going to be very absorbing. So I would not recommend that you shop for a new auditor during this school year. I think you defer it until next school year after you've gone through this collective bargaining round. I had a very, pretty positive experience. I talked with this auditing team about a number of topics. I felt like they listened to me. I thought we came to an agreement on property taxes, pretty, about, interpretation of certain procedures that go through the county. So I would give them, at least a B+ as far as, my experience in working with an independent auditor. Maybe even an A-. I didn't really have any red flags working with them. I think they did a fine job. And so I would say, because you have so many other things on your plate, I would not be an advocate that you go out for shopping and going out. Because really the process of hiring a new auditing firm, and by the way, this is the same auditing firm that works with the Township Treasurer Organization, so there's a plus in that, because they can look at how these two entities or fiscal entities are interacting. But this needs to be a board involved process. When you hire a new auditing firm, you need to have a subcommittee of the board formed and interview all of your auditing firms, deliberate, come up with, sort of like hiring a new architect. And that, as you found, is a significant commitment of time. So at this point in time, I'm saying that this firm did a nice job. They seem to be very economical, and I wouldn't advocate that you go out to shop for a new auditor.
Okay. How long has this auditor been working for the district? Do we know?
I don't know.
Enough.
I'd say probably at least 7 or 8 years, my guess.
So this auditor has been around for 7 or 8 years, and I guess it raises the question, did they service well 7 or 8 years ago? Perhaps they're doing well now, but there have been some questions about our financial, our financial house, keeping it in order and so forth. Starting with the credit cards and perhaps some overpayment issues with our previous superintendent. So that's, is that what you're alluding to, Rich?
Well, essentially I'm saying that, I didn't know how long they'd been affiliated with the district, and, in my experience that, after a certain period of time, you change it up to get a fresh set of eyes on it. I mean, I understand what you're saying, that now may not be a good time, and you haven't seen any red flags, and your conversations have been good. So maybe it's not something that's a front burner topic for us, but I don't think it should be put off. And I'm not predisposed either way on this specific auditor, I'm just saying. Fresh set of eyes is always good.
I agree.
I know, David, you had said that you know of at least one school district that it's part of their policy to change every 3 years.
Yeah, Warrenville. The Warrenville Township High School changes their auditing firm every 3 years by board policy.
Can we get a subcommittee together?
I will look into it. Very good. No,
Okay.
I agree, and just to examine the policy of, should we even adopt that policy of a new auditor every 3 years, just to, another method of control. So, very good. At this time, I'll just remind people of the upcoming meeting dates. At November 4th, right after this, we have a special meeting. On November 18th, we'll have a regular business meeting at 7 o'clock at the Learning Resource Center in Hauser. December 2nd will be a Finance Committee meeting, and December 16th will be the regular Business Committee meeting. So at this, I would like to see if there's may I have a motion to close the November 4th Finance Committee meeting?
I move that we close today's Finance Committee meeting. You want to second it?
Second, sorry, we're paying attention.
Roll call?
Oh my God, these chairs are horrid.
Richard?
Oh, God.
These chairs are terrible, aren't they?
Aren't they? Yeah, everybody.
You're a lot younger
Very
than I
good.
am.
Meeting's adjourned at 9:24.